It was early on a cloudy Monday morning, August 18th, 2003, when a ferry worker along the River Mersey in Liverpool noticed something unusual in the water. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe an old mannequin or abandoned trash caught in the current. But as the object drew closer, he felt his stomach turn. It wasn't plastic or wood. What he had seen floating in the river was human. What emerged from the brown, silted water would haunt not only him, but an entire city for decades to come. It was the torso of a young black boy. No head, no arms, no legs, nothing that could help identify him. Just a lifeless, silent core of what had once been a child. Authorities responded immediately, cordoning off the area and recovering the body. It was a deeply unsettling scene. Officers and forensic teams, hardened by years of seeing the worst humanity had to offer, fell into a tense silence as they examined the remains. The body was well preserved despite the water, but it was clear this was no accident. This was a murder, a planned, calculated, and deeply disturbing one. The child, estimated to be between 5 and 8 years old, was given the temporary name Isaac, a name chosen by police simply to humanize him during their investigation. It would soon become clear, however, that whoever Isaac truly was, someone had gone to great lengths to erase him from existence. The post-mortem examination revealed even more horrifying details. Inside Isaac's stomach were traces of crushed seeds, grains resembling a mix of sand and red African clay, and microscopic flecks of gold dust. Toxicologists identified 2 of the seeds. One came from a plant known for inducing vivid hallucinations, often used in spiritual ceremonies. The second seed was highly toxic, capable of paralyzing the muscles, including those needed to scream or move. The implications were chilling. Isaac may have been fully aware, but physically frozen during his killing. The surgical nature of the wounds also stood out. His throat had been cut in a clean, intentional motion, allowing his blood to drain completely. His limbs and head had been removed with eerie precision, likely by someone who had done it before, possibly someone trained or ritually practiced. One of the few pieces of clothing found with Isaac was a pair of orange shorts, oddly clean and in relatively good condition. Investigators traced the shorts back to a specific Dutch retail chain, confirming they were only sold in Amsterdam and Rotterdam. This, paired with the African plants found in his system, pointed to a troubling theory. Isaac had been smuggled from West Africa to UK via the Netherlands, a known route used by human traffickers. He had been in the UK for just a few days, long enough to be transported, but not long enough to be noticed, not long enough to be reported missing. This raised a terrible question. Was Isaac ever meant to be found at all? Or even worse, was he ever meant to live beyond the purpose he had been brought here for? The evidence led authorities to a theory rooted in a dark corner belief systems, ritual sacrifice, specifically a practice known as muti killings, originating from some regions in southern and western Africa. In these killings, body parts of children are used in traditional medicine and magic believed to grant power, prosperity, or protection. Though widely condemned and rare, the signs in Isaac's case aligned disturbingly well. But without a name, a family, or a community that reported him missing, police were stuck. In a desperate move, detectives flew to Ghana and Nigeria in 2004, appealing to the public and even spiritual leaders for information. They showed photos of the shorts, described the age, but not one family came forward. Not a single mother reported a missing son. It was as if Isaac had never existed on paper. No passport, no school records, no medical history. Only evidence that he had once lived, and even more disturbing proof that someone had decided he shouldn't. In 2005, a break in the case seemed possible. A Nigerian woman named Halima Ode was arrested in Leeds under suspicion of trafficking. In her home, Police found clothing strikingly similar to Isaac's and documents with falsified identities. More alarmingly, Halima openly spoke of sacrifice rituals and cultural practices involving children. Though she denied any involvement in Isaac's murder, she claimed to have once cared for a boy named Mika Adan, whom she later handed over to a man she only knew as Ezra. According to Halima, Ezra had told her later that Mika had fulfilled his purpose. That chilling phrase sent investigators down another path. They discovered Ezra was likely an alias for Olamide Taiwo, a Nigerian-born trafficker and spiritual practitioner who had entered the UK through Germany. When police raided his flat, they uncovered something haunting, a collection of ritual items, jars filled with organic matter, beads, bones, and a video labeled Sacrifice showing a dramatized decapitation. Yet, despite the disturbing nature of what they found, no direct evidence linked Taiwo to Isaac. He was deported back to Nigeria in 2006 after being convicted on unrelated trafficking charges. In December 2008, 5 years after he was pulled from the water, Isaac was finally laid to rest in an unmarked grave in a small London cemetery. Only a few police officers, medical staff, and journalists who had followed the case attended. No family, no name on the tombstone, just a number, and the memory of a child the world failed to protect. Years passed. Online communities, especially true crime forums and Reddit threads, took up Isaac's case. Some theorized that Isaac was not trafficked, but rather bred for sacrifice, raised entirely outside any system, with no birth certificate, no legal record, and no identity. Others suggested that his own parents might have offered him for the ritual, explaining why no one came forward. Some even speculated that he had died in a secret cult ceremony, with roots stretching into Europe's underground spiritualist network. In 2021, 18 years after murder, authorities quietly reopened Isaac's file. They had uncovered new digital communications linking known ritual practitioners in the UK to similar killings across Europe. But still, Isaac's name, identity, and killer remain unknown. He came into the country without a voice, without protection, and when he was taken, the world moved on as if he never mattered. But we remember, and we ask again, who was Isaac, and why was no one looking for him? Professor Milan Varga wasn't just another name in the academic world. He was a rising star. Born on February 12, 1949 in Bratislava, he came of age during the cold grip of Soviet influence, witnessing firsthand the intersection of political oppression, underground spirituality, and intellectual resistance. These early experiences would shape his life's work, a groundbreaking academic focus on mysticism, ancient magic, and the hidden influence of belief systems across cultures. By the 1990s, Varga had carved out a unique space for himself, respected across Europe and North America for his fearlessness in discussing topics others dismissed as fringe. But what no one expected, what no one was prepared for, was how suddenly and violently that work would come to an end. On the afternoon of June 8, 1993, just past 2:15 p.m., a routine day at the University of Toronto turned into a scene from a nightmare. A graduate student entered the third-floor men's bathroom in the philosophy building. As he approached the stalls, something unusual caught his eye, a motionless arm sticking out from beneath the closed door. The hand was pale, limp, and lifeless. He called out once then again, but received no response. Fearing the worst, he ran for help. Campus security arrived quickly, broke open the door, and there, slumped against a partition, was the lifeless body of Professor Milan Varga. The cause of death was immediately apparent. A single gunshot wound to the top of the head, fired at point-blank range. The weapon, a .22 caliber pistol, was not found at the scene. No gunshots had been heard. No one had seen anything. Investigators theorized that the killer had hidden in the adjacent stall, stood on the toilet, and waited. When Milan entered, the shooter struck, fast, efficient, and silent. There was no struggle, no blood trail, no indication that Milan had even known he was being followed. It was an execution, and it was deeply, chillingly personal. Milan had not been robbed. His wallet, wristwatch, and briefcase were untouched. Nothing was stolen. The university was stunned. Students cried openly. Faculty held emergency meetings. The media descended on the campus, demanding answers, but there were none. Milan Varga had no known enemies, no ex-partners with grudges, no financial troubles. In fact, he was engaged to be married later that year to a fellow scholar named Dr. Evelyn Tarrant, who described him as devoted, funny, and unshakably kind. By all public accounts, Milan was a man without controversy. But as detectives dug deeper, a far stranger side of Professor began to emerge, one steeped in secrets, rituals, and the unexplained. Among his private belongings, police found not only academic texts on religion and history, but handwritten notes on arcane languages, references to ritual spells, and a stack of tarot cards annotated in Latin and Hebrew. Milan, it seemed, had gone beyond theory. He was a practitioner, at least in part, of the very traditions he studied. He had attended underground gatherings on transmigration of the soul, corresponded with mystics in Eastern Europe, and even led quiet retreats exploring soul memory activation. Friends and colleagues, once hesitant, came forward after the murder confirmed that Milan had performed tarot readings, often predicting events with eerie accuracy. In one particularly strange event, Milan had delivered a lecture in Budapest in 1990 on the dark symbolism of Renaissance-era magic. There, he was interrupted by 3 women who claimed to be part of a lineage of European witches. They accused him of unlawful interference in sacred doctrine and warned him that his work was a spiritual provocation. Within a week, Milan fell violently ill with an unknown virus. So did his assistant, and so did 2 of the audience members who had sat in the front row. The illnesses passed, but the experience rattled him. He wrote in a journal, later recovered, that he believed forces beyond reason had taken notice of him. At this point in the investigation, the FBI got involved. They didn't take an occult theory lightly. The United States had a growing concern about ritualistic killings, and Milan's murder had the hallmarks of something more than random violence. For a time, agents explored whether Milan had been killed by a spiritual extremist, or worse, a cult. But again, no direct links emerged. Then came the political angle. Milan had long been critical of the Czechoslovakian government, both during and after its communist regime. He had authored multiple essays, some of which accused both the former STB secret police and modern political elites of corruption, censorship, and collusion with organized crime. Milan's writings were bold, perhaps even dangerous. According to one former student, Milan had once received anonymous letters warning him to stay silent or face consequences. A break-in at his apartment weeks before the murder saw his notes tampered with, though nothing was taken. He never filed a police report. This led to a theory that Milan had been assassinated, either by remnants of the communist intelligence network or by a criminal organization seeking to silence him. Some even suspected international links, pointing to Romanian or Russian intelligence, given the professor's influence across borders. The theory was chilling, but it didn't fully explain the ritualistic undertones of the crime. Why the bathroom? Why such precision? And why a weapon never recovered, with 0 fingerprints or DNA? Years later, new claims emerged online. One Reddit user claiming to be the grandchild of a former academic said that Milan had been investigating the illicit trade of ancient religious artifacts. Supposedly, these objects were being trafficked through universities under the cover of research exchanges. Milan had allegedly discovered proof of a multi-country operation dealing in stolen relics, some of which were believed to possess power by their holders. If this was true, It could offer a motive that combined both political and esoteric dimensions, but the source remained anonymous, and no evidence ever surfaced. By 1996, the case had gone cold. Toronto police reviewed the file every few years, but without new witnesses, physical evidence, or credible confessions, the investigation never moved forward. Dr. Evelyn Tarrant never married. She left academia and became a private researcher, rarely granting interviews. In her final public comment about Milan, she said, "He opened doors we weren't ready to look behind. And for that, someone closed his." To this day, the murder of Professor Milan Varga remains unsolved. A scholar who delved into the mysteries of magic and soul migration ended up becoming a mystery himself, a question with no answer. Was he a victim of political silencing, the target of an occult vendetta, or simply a man who knew something he was never supposed to discover? It was the late summer of 1976, and the English countryside seemed almost too peaceful, basking under an uncharacteristically warm September sun. The harvest had begun early that year. Farmers across the region of Ashmoor, a quiet village tucked away in Norfolk's rural borderlands, were tending their fields, unaware that something horrifying was hiding just beyond the hedgerows. On September 5th, a tractor driver working the outer paths of Wexley Farm noticed something odd in a patch of tall, dry grass near an abandoned lane. He stopped the vehicle and stepped down to investigate. At first glance, it looked like industrial debris, maybe an old carpet or discarded tarp. But as he pulled the plastic apart, the smell hit him like a wave, and what he saw would change the sleepy village forever. The decomposing, headless body of a woman, wrapped in plastic, tied in rope, and dumped like garbage. The scene was gruesome. The woman's hands and legs had been bound tightly against her torso using a thick, coarse rope. Her body was wrapped in multiple layers of plastic sheeting, embossed with a strange logo that police would later trace to an old computing company that had since gone out of business. The most haunting detail? She had no head. It had been cleanly severed with skill and intention. There was no blood nearby, no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. It was immediately clear that this was not the place she was killed. She had been murdered elsewhere, her body transported and hidden in a location chosen specifically for isolation. Forensic pathologists determined the woman had died about 3 weeks earlier, sometime between August 2nd and 10th. Despite the decomposition, they were able to piece together a profile. She was likely between 24 and 36 years old, of petite build, standing no more than 5 foot 1 inch tall. She had given birth at least once, according to pelvic evidence, and her bones showed signs of limited nutrition in early life, suggesting a difficult upbringing. She wore a faded blue nightgown, the kind sold at British home stores in 1971, already out of style by the time of her death. But there were no rings, no tattoos, no scars, no dental records to compare. And with her head missing, investigators had no face to show the public. The rope used to bind her body was an unusual type, a rare 4-strand twist, most commonly used in architectural pulley systems, and traced to a company in Belfast that had gone bankrupt in 1978. Investigators also examined the plastic sheeting. It carried the logo of Brickcomp Limited, a computing manufacturer that once supplied cash register components to supermarkets across the UK. It was the only lead they had, a corporate link that might help narrow down who had access to such materials. But as the weeks passed and no one came forward to identify her, panic slowly turned to confusion. How could a woman simply vanish in one of the most surveilled nations on earth? Where were her family, her friends, her employer, her neighbors? Police checked every missing persons report filed across the UK between 1973 and 1976, cross-referencing descriptions, known clothing, and regional data. They expanded the search to Scotland, Wales, and parts of Northern Ireland. Still nothing. She was dubbed simply Jane of Ashmoor, and she remained nameless. By the early 1980s, with the case gone cold, Jane was quietly buried in a community plot under a number marker, but investigators never truly gave up. In 2010, advancements in forensic science prompted authorities to exhume her remains, hoping to finally learn more. Using isotope testing, a process that examines trace minerals stored in bones and teeth, scientists concluded that Jane had spent her childhood in Central Europe, likely in Switzerland, Slovakia, or Austria. Even more intriguingly, her bone chemistry showed that she had been drinking Scottish tap water for at least a decade, suggesting she had relocated to the UK long before her death. But what brought her here? And who had she become? That same year, her story aired on BBC's Crime Watch, reaching millions. Tips flooded in, but one lead stood out. A retired officer from the Great Yarmouth Division called the tip line and said he recognized the description. Back in the early 1970s, there had been a well-known sex worker operating along the A12 in coastal regions named Giselle, a foreign woman, possibly Danish or Swiss, who was known for hitchhiking with truck drivers and traveling from city to city. She was frequently seen wearing vintage nightgowns and was arrested once in 1973, but records from that period have been lost or destroyed during a fire in the evidence archive. Could Jane of Ashmoor be Giselle? The profile matched. Giselle had been described as petite, soft-spoken, and deeply private. She often stayed at roadside motels and truck stops, and she was rumored to have a child, though no one had ever seen the baby. Her clients were mostly long-haul truckers, many of whom worked routes that included industrial goods transport, including electronics, like the cash machines Britcom produced. One former driver told reporters in 2012 that he had given Giselle a ride from Aberdeen to Ipswich in the summer of 1974, but she had seemed agitated and scared. That was the last time he ever saw her. This new theory ignited speculation. Was Giselle murdered by one of her clients? Was she caught up in something larger, perhaps a trafficking network or illegal smuggling operation, and eliminated as a liability? Was the removal of her head intended to prevent authorities from matching her to the name Giselle, a woman who, while not legally documented, was known by face in many cities? Some theorists believe Jane may have discovered criminal dealings involving Britcom equipment, being transported in secret by drivers who moonlighted in illegal activities. If she knew something and threatened to expose it, someone may have silenced her permanently. Others thought she was killed in a ritualistic context, citing the rope and plastic as signs of ceremonial containment. But those theories remain purely speculative. By 2016, students at Dundee's Abaddon University attempted to research her identity through old newspaper clippings, trucking logs, and interviews with retired officers. Though they reportedly uncovered new leads, authorities never released what those leads were, and no charges were ever filed. Today, nearly 50 years after the discovery of the Headless Woman in Ashmoor, the mystery endures. Her grave remains marked only by a number. Her name, her past, and her final moments remain shrouded in silence. And while some still believe she was Giselle, the traveler, the mother, the woman who trusted the wrong man, others think she may have been someone else entirely. Someone whose story we'll never fully know, because in the end, she is more than a case file. She is more than the plastic that held her or the rope that bound her. She was a person, forgotten by the world, but never forgotten by those still searching for answers.